The wire transfer cleared at 2 a.m., $3 million, through an account that didn't exist 6 hours earlier. By 6:34 that morning, I'd burned everything I built. Here's what happened in between. The confirmation was still on the screen when I stopped reading it. $3 million moved in under 4 minutes, through an account name I didn't recognize and couldn't find anywhere in our records. The office was completely quiet. That specific kind of quiet you only get at 2 a.m. in a glass box 39 floors above, a city that doesn't know anything is wrong yet. I remember thinking the number looked almost routine. That's the thing about a well-engineered crisis. It's designed to look like paperwork until it's too late to treat it like anything else. I didn't move for a long time. I just sat there with the screen light on my face and tried to figure out how far back I had to go to find the moment I let this in. 8 weeks earlier, the lawsuit arrived on a Tuesday, which felt wrong. Bad news is supposed to find you on a Friday when there's nowhere to go. Cole Drayton's attorneys had filed a breach of fiduciary claim in the Southern District, 41 pages, and the number my own attorney put on the table before he even finished summarizing it was $4 million, just to defend. Whether we won or not. My attorney had this way of delivering numbers like that, very level, like he was reading a weather report. And I remember watching his face and thinking, he's not surprised. That was the part that stayed with me, not the suit itself. The fact that he'd seen enough of these to already know how it ended. Petra wanted to settle. She said it clearly, no hedging. Pay Cole, get a confidentiality clause, and protect the fund's relationships before investors heard the word lawsuit and started asking questions we didn't want to answer. Sione said that was exactly the kind of thinking that let predators like Cole keep operating. That we owed it to the industry to fight publicly and make it expensive for him. They were both right. That was the problem. I stood at the whiteboard between them and I could feel the room splitting along a fault line that had always been there, just never tested at this kind of pressure. I wrote nothing on the board. I just stood there, holding the marker, knowing that whatever I said next was going to mean something I couldn't take back. She called herself a whistleblower, which is a word that carries a lot of weight and is very easy to misuse. Naomi Voss showed up in our lobby on a Thursday morning with a manila envelope, a firm handshake, and a resume that checked out. 2 years at Cole's Fund, departed quietly 8 months ago, no litigation, no visible motive to fabricate anything. She said she had documentation of Cole's valuation practices and that she was willing to be a confidential source if we could protect her. I was careful. I ran her name, called 2 references, had my attorney sit in on the first meeting. All of it clean. What I didn't do, what I keep coming back to, is ask myself why she came to us specifically, with exactly the evidence we needed, at exactly the moment we needed it. I gave her a desk in my office. That's the detail I keep turning over, not the files themselves, but that decision, the one that felt like trust and was actually just convenience. She needed access to our compliance records to cross-reference her evidence with our exposure, which made sense. She needed the counterparty summaries, which made sense. She needed the redemption trigger thresholds, which made sense. Each individual decision had a reason. That's how these things work. Not one large mistake, but a series of small, reasonable ones. Each one sensible in isolation. Each one building a door you don't realize you've opened until someone else has already walked through it. Naomi sat 6 feet from me every afternoon for 3 weeks, and I told myself I was being cautious because I was watching her. I wasn't watching her. I was just watching. She was good. That's the honest thing to say about it. She surfaced a Cole valuation memo from 2 years ago, internal, not public, that showed his fund had marked 3 illiquid positions at prices that bore almost no relationship to their actual market value during a capital raise. It was real. My attorney verified it, ran it against public filings, found the discrepancy independently. That evidence was genuine, which is the thing about a well-constructed plant. You don't use fake evidence, because fake evidence gets checked. You use real evidence that builds enough trust to justify giving access to something more important. I walked past Naomi in the copy room one afternoon, and she had her phone out over an open binder. I remember thinking she was probably texting. I kept walking. Cole's attorneys filed an amended complaint 6 weeks in. 2 new plaintiffs, former LPs who had exited the fund 3 years prior, and a new claim that went somewhere I hadn't expected. The fund's SPV structure from its early years. My attorney called it a fishing expedition. He said the SPV claim was thin, Procedurally risky for Cole. Probably a pressure move. He was right about the strategy. He was wrong about the thinness. I sat across from him in his downtown office and read the highlighted paragraph twice, and the thing I felt wasn't outrage. It was recognition. Cole's attorneys had described the arrangement in general terms, but the terms were accurate. Not everything from that period of the fund's life had been structured in a way I was proud of, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I'd been hoping that fact would stay buried exactly where I'd put it. I went home that night and pulled the original SPV files out of a storage box I hadn't opened in 4 years. Kitchen table, a glass of water I didn't drink, my own handwriting in the margins of documents I barely remembered signing. The arrangements weren't criminal. I want to be precise about that. They weren't criminal, they were gray. Fee structures routed through a subsidiary in a way that benefited the general partner more than it should have, disclosed in language technical enough that most LPs wouldn't catch it without a forensic accountant. Everybody did it. That was genuinely true. I told myself that, and I believed it. And what I didn't examine was whether everybody did it was a reason or just a sound I was making to fill the space where a reason should have been. I closed the files. I went to bed. I decided that Cole's lawsuit would never get that far, and I decided not to look at that decision too hard. The morning Naomi walked into the conference room with the Cole memo felt like the kind of turn you wait weeks for. She slid a single page across the table. No copies, no email, the original. And my attorney read it twice without looking up. Cole's internal communications, 2 years prior, an explicit instruction from his senior analyst to hold the mark on a position they all knew had deteriorated. It was clean, specific, and devastating. My attorney said quietly that if this was authenticated, we could flip the entire lawsuit. Not settle it, flip it, go on offense, and force Cole into a disclosure situation he wouldn't survive. I remember the feeling in that room. Something that had been contracting for 6 weeks opened up slightly. That feeling, I've thought about this a lot since, that feeling is exactly what it was designed to produce. For the first time in 6 weeks, Petra, Sione, and I were in the same room and pointing in the same direction. Sione called it the leverage we should have had from day one. Petra said she wanted the authentication done before we filed anything. Careful, methodical, exactly right. There was a moment, maybe 20 seconds, where it felt like the thing that had been fracturing us was sealing back over. We shook hands. I remember the specific quality of the light in that conference room. Mid-afternoon, the city laid out behind the glass, everyone's posture different than it had been for weeks. I remember thinking, this is the turning point. I was right about that part. What I had wrong was the direction it was turning. The call came at 2:40 in the afternoon, and I almost didn't answer it. I didn't recognize the number immediately, and I was in the middle of drafting a response to Cole's attorneys. The family office had been with the fund for 7 years. They were quiet investors, patient, kind of LP you build a fund around because they don't panic and they don't grandstand. Their managing director said, liquidity concerns, and then repeated it when I asked him to be more specific. He said they'd received information suggesting the fund had undisclosed exposure. He was careful with his words, not accusatory, almost apologetic, which made it worse, because it meant they'd already decided. I asked him what information. He said he wasn't at liberty to say. When someone who's trusted you for 7 years picks that particular phrase, you understand that something has already happened that you don't know about yet. The email from the second anchor investor came in at 8:47 p.m. My assistant found it. She was still at her workstation because I'd asked everyone to stay, and she called my name once, quietly, in a way that told me before I crossed the room what it was going to say. Full redemption notice, effective as of close of the next business day. 2 full redemptions within 6 hours. Our minimum operating AUM threshold was a hard line in the fund's governing documents, not a soft target. If both positions cleared simultaneously, the fund would be technically insolvent before the week was out. I stood behind my assistant and read the email twice. I remember the office around me, the open plan desks, the monitors still glowing, 3 other people pretending not to watch. And I remember understanding for the first time that I wasn't dealing with a lawsuit anymore. I got both investors on the phone within the hour. Different calls, same story. Each of them had received a document package, anonymous, no return address, sent to their compliance officers directly. The packages described the fund's internal structure, counterparty exposure by category, the specific thresholds at which redemptions would trigger technical default, even the timing windows in our liquidity provisions. Not summaries, specifics. The kind of detail that lives in compliance files that are never supposed to leave the building. I paced the hallway outside the main floor and kept my voice level because there were still people at their desks on the other side of the glass, and I needed them not to know what I was learning in real time. The second investor's managing director said, almost gently, "Whoever sent this knew the fund very well." I said I appreciated his candor. I hung up. I stood in that corridor for a moment and thought about who in this building had known it that well. The anonymous packages described the fund's internal structure the way only someone inside would. Not broad strokes, but the specific line items. Counterparty exposure by tranche, the exact redemption thresholds that would trigger the insolvency clause. I pulled up Naomi's access log on one monitor and the leaked document on the other. I started at the top and worked down line by line. By the fourth item, I already knew. I kept going anyway, the way you do when part of you is still hoping you're wrong. When the alternative is so much worse than being wrong that you need the proof to be undeniable before you'll let yourself believe it. By the 12th item, it was undeniable. I dialed her number standing at the window. I didn't sit down. I think some part of me needed to be on my feet. She picked up on the second ring, which was wrong. It was nearly 10 at night and she should have been asleep or at least startled. Instead, she said, "I was wondering when you'd call." And that sentence, those 6 words told me everything her voice was too controlled to admit. I asked her directly, did she feed documents to Cole's team? She said no calmly, the way someone says no when they've practiced it. There was no defensiveness, no hurt, just a smooth, flat denial that had no texture to it at all. She was expecting this call. She had been for days. The building's badge system kept a log of every room access. Floor time, employee ID. I had the IT manager pull Naomi's record for the past 6 weeks. On 3 separate nights when she'd sent me messages from what she said was her home office, casual check-ins, a document attached, nothing that flagged, her badge had been used to enter the server room here. First visit, 11:42 p.m. Second visit, 1:08 a.m. Third visit, 12:55 a.m. I read each timestamp twice. The IT manager didn't say anything. He just sat there in that small room with his hands in his lap. Because there isn't really anything to say when a log like that is on the screen. I went to the conference room and wrote it on the whiteboard because I needed to see the whole shape at once. I needed it outside my head. Cole files the lawsuit. The lawsuit forces us into defense mode, burns our time, burns our capital. Naomi walks in with exactly the offer we need, exactly when we need it. We give her access. She extracts the architecture. She hands Cole the 2 pressure points, our counterparty exposure and our redemption triggers, and he uses them to manufacture a liquidity crisis so precise it looks organic. Then he positions himself to buy us at the bottom before anyone can prove the bottom was built. I stood back and looked at what I'd drawn. It was elegant. That was the part that was hard to sit with. How well designed it was. The wire confirmation appeared in my inbox at 2:17 a.m. $3,000, originating account flagged as newly registered, destination a holding entity I'd never seen before. I'd been expecting it. Knowing it was coming didn't make it easier to look at. That number meant the acquisition wasn't theoretical anymore. Cole had already started moving capital through the structure, which meant, and he believed the fund was as good as his. He was right about the timeline. He had built something that should have worked. I sat in the dark with the laptop screen the only light in the room, and I thought, he doesn't know yet that I've seen all of it. That was the only advantage I had. I had maybe 4 hours before the markets open and the window closed. I called Petra first because I thought she'd be the harder conversation, and I was right. She already knew about the redemptions. Of course she did. The fund's legal team had notified both partners the moment the second notice came in. She was calm in the way people are calm when they've already made their decision and are just waiting to say it out loud. She said, accept Cole's offer, negotiate the terms, protect the LPs, and protect ourselves from personal liability, and move on. She wasn't wrong about the liability. That was the thing I kept turning over while she talked. She was reading the situation correctly. She just wasn't reading the whole situation. I told her I was still thinking. She said there wasn't much time left for that. Sione was in his car, I could hear the engine or maybe a fan, a low hum underneath everything he said. He didn't need the background. The moment I told him about Naomi and the access logs, he had already arrived at his answer. Call every financial reporter we had a relationship with, get the story out before sunrise, make Cole's name radioactive before he could complete the transfer. Burn it, he said. All of it. Let them sort the ash. I understood why he wanted that. I'd wanted it myself for about 30 seconds earlier, standing at the whiteboard. But Sione's version had one problem. It protected neither the LPs nor the evidence chain. It was grief, dressed up as strategy. I told neither of them what I was actually considering, partly because I wasn't certain yet. Or maybe I was certain and just needed a few more minutes of pretending I wasn't. I opened the desk drawer and pulled out the SPV binder. A gray 3-ring binder with a handwritten label from 2011, corners soft with age. I set it on the desk and looked at it for a moment without opening it. I knew what was in there. I had known for weeks since Cole's amended complaint named the structure. If I went the route I was thinking about, this binder didn't stay in the drawer. It became part of what I handed over. That was the part Petra didn't know about. That was the part that made every other option feel cleaner than it actually was. I read the SPV files start to finish. The way you reread something you already know because you're hoping it says something different, it didn't. The fee arrangements from 2011 and Twendalval were gray. Not criminal, I believed that then, and I believed it now, but structured in ways that assumed no one would look closely, which is its own kind of answer. I'd been 29, 30. I told myself it was industry standard, which was true and that it was therefore fine, which was not the same thing. The lawyers had signed off, the auditors had not objected. I'd let those facts become a permission slip and then stop thinking about it. I wasn't the only person in finance who had done that. I was also aware, sitting there at 3:40 in the morning, that this had officially stopped being a useful thing to think about. 2 years ago, an SEC enforcement attorney had reached out to the fund about an unrelated matter. A counterparty of ours had come up in a broader inquiry, nothing that touched us directly, and it had resolved without incident. She'd left her card anyway. I remembered being slightly irritated by the gesture at the time, as if she were leaving a reminder that they could find us if they needed to. I'd put the card in the back of my desk drawer and not thought about it since. Now, I opened the drawer and felt around behind the hanging files until my fingers found it. Slightly bent, edges soft. Renata Cross in embossed text, SEC Enforcement Division. A direct line, handwritten below the printed number. I held it under the lamp. The handwritten ink had faded just slightly. She'd probably given out 100 cards like this and forgotten most of them. I was about to remind her of this one. I moved to the conference room because the desk felt too small for what I was about to do. I laid out 2 folders on the long table and started building them, document by document. The first folder was Cole, the acquisition wire, the Shell account registration, the anonymized investor packages with the non-public fund details, Naomi's access logs cross-referenced to the dates, a clean evidentiary chain. The second folder was us, me, the SPV binder, the 2011 fee structure, the 2 attorney sign-offs, my own margin notes. I didn't hesitate putting it in. I'd already made that decision back at the desk. This was just the physical act of following through on it. What surprised me was how calm my hands were. I had expected some version of dread. What I felt instead was something closer to relief, which told me something about how long I'd been carrying the SPV files without acknowledging the weight. I was about to close the second folder when I scrolled back to the top of the building access log. I'm not sure why, some restless instinct that the picture wasn't complete yet. Naomi's entries were on the left column. I almost missed it because I was looking at her name, not the lines below it. A second badge number, 3 digits, different from hers, accessing the same server room on 2 of the same nights. Different times, but the same room, same files. I zoomed in, then looked at the IT manager. He pulled up the employee registry. The badge belonged to someone on our operations staff, someone who had been with the fund for 4 years, who had access to everything, who had sat in meetings I'd run every week. I didn't say the name out loud. I just looked at it on the screen and understood that the leak was never just Naomi. Cole had 2 doors into this house. I didn't have time to trace it further, and even if I did, I wasn't sure what I would do with the answer. Confront someone at 4:30 in the morning and watch them lie to my face. I added the second badge log to the documentation package and made a note in plain language. Unknown internal actor, badge ID redacted, access corroborates, external breach, see attached. Let Renata's people pull the thread. That was their job now, not mine. I stood in the hallway with the folder under my arm and the office quiet around me. The overnight HVAC humming, the city a pale smear of light through the windows. And I let myself understand that whatever investigation came out of this call was going to go through every room in this building, including rooms I had built. I had maybe 15 minutes before I needed to decide. I already knew what I was going to do. I just hadn't done it yet. At 4:47 a.m., I dialed Renata Cross. I'd kept her card in the back of my desk drawer for 2 years, slightly bent at one corner, her name in plain serif type. The SEC seal faded from the paper, pressing against the wood. She answered on the third ring, no greeting, just silence that said she was awake and listening. I told her 3 things. I had documentation of a coordinated hostile acquisition through manufactured liquidity fraud. I was the managing partner of the fund being acquired, and the records I was providing would likely implicate me as well. 12 words into the third sentence, my voice went flat and steady in a way I hadn't planned. I wasn't performing calm. I'd simply run out of anything else to be. Renata Cross said she would send someone to my office within the hour. She told me not to move the documents and not to contact my partners. Her voice carried the specific flatness of someone who has heard a lot of confessions and learned not to reward them with warmth. Then she paused. A real pause, not a processing pause, and asked, "Do you understand what you just did?" I said yes. She didn't say good, didn't say thank you, didn't say anything else before the line went quiet. I stood there holding the phone against my ear for another 5 seconds after she'd hung up, listening to nothing, which was somehow the most honest thing I'd heard all night. I sat down, opened my laptop, and wrote 2 lines to Petra and Sione. I took the third path, I'm sorry. Nothing else. No explanation, no ask for understanding, no prediction about what came next. I hit send before I could add a sentence that softened it, then closed the laptop and sat for a moment in the dark with my own handwriting visible in the margin of the SPV binder still open on my desk. Younger handwriting, different ink, a version of me who had decided a gray choice was good enough. I turned off the desk lamp. The room went dark, except for the city behind the glass. I wasn't waiting for anything. I was just sitting in what I'd done. The SEC field attorney arrived at 5:50 a.m. with 2 agents. All 3 in gray coats, no drama, the kind of professional quiet that feels more serious than any raised voice. I held the lobby door and handed over the 2 folders at the threshold. One agent cataloged the contents on a clipboard. The attorney, maybe 40, wire-rimmed glasses, a stillness to her that reminded me uncomfortably of Naomi, thanked me with a nod and asked me to show them to the conference room. I walked them down the hallway, past the empty desks of a staff who didn't know yet, past the glass wall of the room where 4 weeks ago we'd thought Naomi's memo was the break we'd been waiting for. Then I left them there and went back to my office and stood at the window. At 6:11 a.m., one of the agents stepped into my office doorway. He didn't come in, just stood at the frame, hands in his coat pockets, and said that the emergency halt had gone through. Cole's wire was frozen. That was the whole sentence. I nodded once, and he went back down the hall. I turned back to the window. The city was fully light by then, the kind of cold, clear morning that looks like nothing happened and owes you nothing. I had stopped Cole's move. The fund was still going to go into SEC review. My position was still gone. Both of those things were true at the same time, and I found somewhat to my surprise that I could hold them both. At 6:34 a.m., my phone buzzed on the desk. I looked down at it. Cole Drayden. Not a text, a call, his name right there on the screen, the phone vibrating with a patience that felt deliberate. The SEC halt order had gone through 23 minutes earlier. There was no public filing, no press release, no leak I could account for. The only people who knew were Renata Cross, the 3 agents down the hall, and whoever had told Cole. Someone inside that apparatus had made a call the moment I made mine. I stared at the phone until it stopped vibrating. The room stayed quiet. That was when I understood the actual size of what I was standing in. I didn't answer. I let it ring out, and I watched the screen go dark. And I stood there, understanding something I hadn't let myself think all the way through. I hadn't beaten Cole. I'd stopped one move, his infrastructure, the people who owed him, the lines inside institutions I'd just trusted with everything. That was still intact. Maybe it always would be. What I'd bought was time, a disruption, a crack in a machine that would find another gear. That should have felt like failure. Strangely, it didn't. I had given regulators the thread. What they did with it wasn't mine to control anymore. I had been responsible for what I could see, and I had acted on it. That was the whole of what I had. I thought about Naomi, the lobby handshake, how she'd said, "I want to help you stop him," with her eyes level and her voice even, and how I'd believed her because I wanted to believe her. Because it was easier to trust someone who appeared at exactly the right moment with exactly the right information than to ask why the timing was so perfect. I'd replayed the copy room moment 100 times since midnight, the phone angled at the binder page, and I realized I'd walked past it not because I missed it, but because I hadn't wanted to see it. That's a different thing. I'm not sure it makes me a fool. I think it makes me a person who let hope do the work that scrutiny should have done. Petra called at 6:41. I picked up. Neither of us said anything for a moment. I could hear her breathing, and I knew she'd been awake the same hours I had, sitting with the same news arriving in pieces. Then she said, "Did you know they'd come after you too?" I said yes. A long silence. Then, "Okay." She hung up. That was it. 2 sentences and an okay, which, coming from Petra, was something close to absolution, or at least acknowledgement, which is sometimes all you get. I sat down in my chair for the first time in hours. The chair was the same chair. The office was the same office. Everything in it belonged to a version of my life that was already over. I took my jacket from the hook behind the door. I didn't pick up my laptop, didn't take the SPV binder, didn't pull the framed photo off the credenza, the one from the fund's first close. All of us younger and believing in ourselves in the uncomplicated way you can when nothing has gone wrong yet. I left it. I walked out through the main floor, past the empty desks, past the conference room where the 3 agents were still working, one of them writing on a yellow legal pad. None of them looked up. I pressed the elevator button and waited. The doors opened. I got in. I've thought a lot about what I told myself standing at that window before I dialed. I didn't call Renata Cross because I was a good person or because I had some clear picture of justice working the way it's supposed to. I called because I'd looked at the alternative, signing over the fund, watching Cole absorb it, knowing what I knew and choosing silence, and I found out I couldn't be that man. Not at 47, not after everything. There's a version of integrity that's actually just the thing you can't stomach, and maybe that's all it ever is. Cole's call at 6:34 told me the corruption went deeper than one field office, deeper than this one morning. I'd wounded something, not killed it. The cost of the call was everything I'd built. I paid it, and I'd pay it again. When Cole's name appeared on that phone at 6:34 a.m., would you have answered it or let it ring? Drop your answer below.